So let's talk about this kind of basic neighborhood infrastructure and its maintenance. It's in everybody's lives all the time, but you've been door knocking all over your ward. So tell me about my favorite thing, alleyways. What's going on with alleyways?
Many residents across the entire ward have spoken about the poor condition of their alleyways. And it seems to center around large potholes. And this very often causes damage to, the underneath, the carriage, the undercarriage of their vehicles. I've also heard of how it's caused damage to the vehicle bumpers as they're trying to either exit or enter the alleyway during the winter months, and how thick of ice can build up in these potholes.
Well, there's some heavy trucks that go down alleyways, come to think of it. I mean, your garbage trucks, various utility or construction vehicles. So you can see how they get beat up pretty quickly. Yeah, I mean, is that true all over the ward?
Absolutely. I think that every ward, starting down at the bottom in Avonmore, right up to Bergman, Montrose, Elmwood, I have heard the complaints right across the ward. Beverly, in fact, in Beverly, someone suggested that we go in the alleyway and take photos, that it was so bad. And, it's about having the cost to maintain and prioritize the renewal of the alleyways in comparison to the big capital projects.
Yeah, they do seem to get torn up a lot and left for a long time. What's your general thought about it, why this happens this way?
Well, it could somehow have to do with the infill development in the mature neighborhoods where the alleyways are dug up and to connect new services. Residents then feel that, they're poorly restored. And then, as you mentioned, the heavy trucks come down, and if the fix if it's just been a patch, then the problem occurs the following winter. So it's continuous. That's what's concerning for the residents.
I think I heard you say something else in passing about other things being budget priorities. What was that?
Well, it's the big capital projects.
Yes.
It's not being against development, but ensuring that when the city engages in large capital projects, that there's accountability for any cost overruns, and that it doesn't come back to affect us as the taxpayer or our core services, so that we're not seeing our services cut as a result.
Well, I guess in a way this carries over onto the front of people's houses, like the sidewalks. Again, because you're door knocking, you see the sidewalks. They're okay in my neighborhood, but is that true across mature neighborhoods? I wouldn't think so. What's going on there?
Well, I've walked every single one of the communities in Ward Métis, and there are certainly some communities where the sidewalks are in dire need of being renewed. And it's more that the pace of the infrastructure is slow, that unrealistic budget forecasting and a lack of flexibility. The work done by the city workers and contractors is done professionally and skillfully. It's just that the city hall needs to empower the work to be done at a faster pace.
Okay, so you see at root here a budget priorities discussion that has to happen. Interesting. I hadn't thought it through that far, but makes sense. But, so diagnosis, I mean, lots of examples. You've got a diagnosis of what's wrong, but how do you solve it? What's the cure here? What does it look like when the streets and alleyways are healthy, so to speak.
Well, it is important that we maintain our sidewalks and our alleyways, mostly from a safety point of view. You know, it's not just in the winter. Yesterday, when I was outdoor knocking, I actually tripped on an uneven sidewalk. But you can imagine that during the winter, when we see the uneven sidewalks or where the sidewalks have been uprooted, you know, from the large trees, this creates a lot of ice damming. And so for our seniors and those with mobility issues, this is, again, an issue of safety. And we shouldn't have people walking in the road rather than on the sidewalk, because the conditions end up being safer on the roadway. So we do need to prioritize in our mature communities and maintain the streetscape infrastructure. And, you know, this is just about perhaps showing some restraint on the larger projects and refocusing on respecting the core services that people deserve to have.
Yeah, and how do you go about keeping in contact with what's happening on the ground? I mean, you know, as a counselor, you're busy at City Hall. I mean, how do you ensure that citizens can get their concerns addressed?
Well, as a city councilor, I believe that as much time as I'm spending in the communities right now, that I would make myself available to the residents and keep an open line of good communication where I would be responding to concerns raised by residents. As much as I'm in the communities now, why wouldn't I, as a city councilor, go out and visit residents who express concerns? Mature neighborhoods, there is a reasonable expectation that sidewalks and alleyways and streetscapes should be both safe and wheelchair accessible. And that means, as a counselor, I get back out in the communities and respond and advocate to have community-based budget priorities.
That's a really good point. Community-based budget priorities would address a whole lot of infrastructure issues. And so I take it that you feel that they haven't been a sufficient priority, particularly from mature neighborhoods.
Well, when you hear from residents that they feel that their renewal is being pushed back, or they come into the community and they do a small block section and then they come back and they don't do the rest until the following year, residents are asking, how come? Like, how come there isn't a priority to make my neighborhood safe and accessible? And that's a very good question. And I think that working with the administration would be to ask those questions. So it's about communicating true timelines and specifics to the residents so that they have reasonable expectations as to how their mature communities are going to be maintained.
You know, a lot of money was put in over the years to put in wheelchair accessible ramps at corners for sidewalks, so they don't all have that big high curb step. Yeah, I think that similar attention should be paid regularly to the safety of the ordinary sidewalk, so to speak. But you know, a lot of our neighborhoods have big treescapes, and it's a little more complicated. But I take it that you just think that's about budget prioritizing. To have safe sidewalk just seems so basic, but there are issues that arise, and so they're more expensive sometimes.
We all enjoy, and certainly I have in the last couple days, enjoy the large mature trees that create shade on our sidewalks. And the large roots do create issues for some of the mature communities. It would be, to me, that's an engineering issue that could be looked at to create long-term fixes, maybe by curving the sidewalks away from the large roots so that you aren't doing these constant fixes without having to go back every couple years and address exactly the same issue. But I can tell you that, having again walked every single one of the communities, there are still communities that do not have the sloped wheelchair access.
Oh.
And this has been a discussion that, to my knowledge, started many years ago and should be a priority for anyone with mobility issues, families out there with a stroller, that at the very least, our corners should be made safe for everyone.
Yeah, sidewalks and boulevards are a shared amenity. And so it's been a long tradition that both the city and the householder share responsibility for, I cut the lawn on the edge and so on. Pick up the branches from the fallen trees in the winter, as the case may be. But you're quite right. There is a budget requirement for the city to do its level best in these areas. But you're talking now about some engineering work. Do contractors, to your knowledge, have the license, as it were, to make those decisions on the ground, or have they just said, go and repair the sidewalk, don't design anything, just repair it? How do you think that actually works in practice?
I think we always need to listen and respect the expertise of those who are actually out there doing the work and asking the questions that might bring longer term solutions. To me, it's an engineering solution, but has anyone actually asked the question, how can we resolve this? Because nobody wants to be cutting down our trees. Trees are very important to our city and to our communities. But we need to think about this and respect the expertise of the professional engineers or workers. Ask your frontline workers, and they might have some really good solutions, long-term solutions.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that. As I said, I worry about the alleys a bit more, perhaps because, well, every day I'm in the alley because my garage is on the alley. I drive my car in and out, and so I observe the quality of that space a lot more than people who are park on the front curb, say. But do you think that this issue applies to all kinds of public infrastructure, or do you think it's just these kind of mature neighborhoods that are particularly ill-served?
I think it affects the mature communities a lot more, and we would hope that as the new communities are being designed, that city planners and architects are going through and learning from our mature communities, and therefore addressing issues in the newer communities to prevent these same issues from coming up.
You've said your thing, I think. And I do think it an interesting topic. And I pressed you on whether the mature neighborhoods were being somehow ill served, but I think you nailed it. It's like the whole theme has not been a sufficient priority in budgeting talks that administration and council have. I mean, you don't want too much deferred maintenance because then the costs just grow and grow and grow, and it's hard to catch up. But there are obligations to serve the communities, and so what you're saying, I think, resonates with me, namely that those mature neighborhoods need more attention at a faster pace than they presently get it. I don't know the politics of that, but it sounds like you have a solution set for it.
There's also the issue of infill and the push to densify our mature communities. There would be, I think, a reasonable understanding that if you're trying to push density in the mature communities and services are being run through the alleyways, then why would the city want to invest a lot of money in completely renewing an alleyway when potentially it's going to have to be dug up to put in new services for an infill development? However, by delaying this, it's creating other safety issues or damage to personal property. So there needs to be a balance where the city isn't seen to be wasting money and doing work and then having it torn up. But the repairs have to be done so that they last more than one winter. It's part of looking after our mature communities. And they're the heart of the city. So therefore, the city does need to give it some priority.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. That warms my heart because not only is the street and the boulevards a shared amenity, but the alleyways are as well. The safety issues. A place looks shabby, then it's going to, and it looks disrespected, then things often spiral in a bad kind of way. And I'd want everybody to have some pride around their neighborhood, both with respect to the streets and boulevards, but the alleys as well. Just makes for a better quality of life. Something that's kind of on my mind as, I just paid my municipal taxes. You think, okay, what am I getting for this? Well, I'm getting a lot of services, so that's fine. But then you look and you see some really sketchy alleyway and you instantly feel very puzzled. So I appreciate the way that you are tackling this topic as one that councilors can grapple with at the level of budgets and pacing. So thank you very much for that thought.
Well, we always have to balance our budget, and we always have to consider the long-term implications. And if we want to incentivize young families and growth within our mature communities, then we don't want to create this sketchy look of alleyways that aren't being maintained. And now with the new garbage rollout, we're asking people to all of a sudden put these bins in alleyways where bags can sit on an uneven surface. It's quite a different situation for these bins, which there are specific rules as to where they need to be positioned, how far from a building they need to be positioned. And so if you have an alleyway that's in a very bad state of repair, that's not going to help this new rollout to be as successful as perhaps it could be.
Oh, I'm glad you reminded me. I keep forgetting that we have a new garbage can rollout program. Somehow I kind of missed this, but how is this supposed to work?
Well, because I'm out there door knocking, I hear a lot of concerns at the door, and the concerns aren't about people wanting or not wanting to recycle. Everyone understands, the benefits to recycling. But this new garbage rollout seems to be affecting our seniors and people with mobility issues. And there needs to be a better service to what's being currently offered. So the city has on its website that you can get assistance with putting the bins out. But I'm concerned with what that means and what people have, the hoops that people have to go through. So for instance, you can either phone or go online and apply, but they're asking the seniors to take a form to their healthcare professional. And it never occurred to me until I went back to speak to a senior who was very distressed, and I had helped him reach out to the city to get some answers. And as he pointed out to me, by taking the form to the healthcare professional, he was potentially going to have to pay $80, $50 to have this form signed by a healthcare professional. And then if he proceeded with an application after that, it would mean that he'd also have to have someone visit and interview him. Do we really want to be doing this to our seniors and people with mobility issues? Shouldn't we just be trusting that these new bins, particularly in the winter, will become challenging for them to maneuver into their alleyways or down a bit of a sloped driveway to the roadway? It's an interesting question, because it seems again that our seniors and people with mobility issues are being most affected.
I agree with that. Also, in the autumn and also in the spring, I clean up an awful lot of leaves from, the boulevard trees, mostly, which are not on my property, but a shared amenity, But, I ended up with 20, 30 bags of leaves. Am I going to be charged extra for that? And I mean, can I put them in plastic bags, or do they have to go in a bin? The whole thing is very confusing. I mean, how do we deal with that?
Well, I also have another story where I met this woman, and again, a senior. And because I was actually at her property, and she said to me, I have no trees. I have no trees on my property. However, she was surrounded in very large city trees on the exterior of her property. She said, I've been living here for over 25 years, and I pick up these leaves, city leaves, every year, and I end up with 36 bags of leaves. She said, now the city wants me as a senior to put them in my vehicle and drive to the eco station. She's saying no, that is simply something that she's not willing to do, that she has done her part as a good neighbor, as a community member, picking up the leaves. It seems unreasonable that we would ask her to then drive maybe several times with 36 bags to the eco center. So what we should be thinking about is, the seasonal waste, and maybe having seasonal pickup between the months of October, November, because the city garbage trucks are already driving down our alleyways. And then doing the same thing again in April, May for that pruning season. And that would be a reasonable fix. Because if we're asking people to drive less, then putting more vehicles on the road to the eco center, sitting and idling in a lineup to get rid of seasonal waste does not seem to be a reasonable outcome.
Well, those are very good points. So what then do you think is the root cause of this? Why do we have a program coming that has some obvious flaws?
Well, I think that the new trucks, and I've seen them as I've been out driving through the communities, where we have the lever arms that do the heavy lifting instead of having the manpower that we've seen over the years, that then creates injuries like with the rotator cuff and long-term disabilities. That this new garbage rollout has some very good benefits, but we need to have the flexibility to understand that there are seasonal variations. And so how do we adjust that? And as much as we want to protect the workers and make their environment safer, we also have to think about our seniors, ensuring that rolling out of these bins doesn't create injuries, slippages, and stress for them, worrying about how they're going to manage this in the wintertime.
So that's how you would seek to repair, as it were, this program. I mean, it is coming at me an awful fast, this garbage plan. But why is it that it seems like a very top-down design. How did that come to pass, and what can be done about those in general terms?
Well, when new plans or projects come into the community, it's very important to, these surveys that are being done. How did we actually survey the communities? I think going back to, residents will agree that recycling is good. It's good for the environment. It's good for our communities. But how did we properly engage to learn the specifics that will be required from the residents? Was it a digital engagement? Was it a door-to-door engagement? Because as I'm door-to-door and speaking to real people, I'm hearing real concerns. And people are saying, we're a family of 5, and we're not allowed to have any extra carts. So at what point did they decide that you had to be an average number of 7 in a household? Where did these numbers come from? Because it's directly affecting many of our residents.
Mhm.
So if it was done through an online survey, I think what we did miss is we missed a lot of our seniors and a lot of our people with mobility issues. People who aren't objecting to recycling, but how does it meet their needs?
It sounds from what you have said also that any survey would not pick up on the quality of the alleyway uh, and the safety issues that you have spoken about. I mean, that probably wasn't in a survey design. Um, so, if you're a counselor, how would you approach new projects that are brought forward by administration? How did this go through scrutiny?
Well, I'm not sat at the council table, so
Mhm.
I'm not able to comment on past events, certainly. But again, what I have demonstrated since I was expressing an interest in becoming a city councillor, the importance of actually being out in the communities, especially in our mature communities, because many of them are unique. They're not all, they haven't been designed the same way that our new communities are. And some of them are a lot more compact than others. So unless you're prepared to be the type of person that will get out to your community and walk through and engage directly, how can you really know, even as a city councillor, how these new changes will impact the community? So what I am trying to demonstrate to the residents, and many residents have appreciated having seen me more than once, that I'm willing to be out there and engage with them directly, walk their walk, as one might say.
That's a very good point. Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, infrastructure. Um, Not usually the high priority topic of the day, but really it gets everybody where they live, quite literally. And so thanks for that. Thank you for asking people at the doorsteps about this stuff. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.